Understood. Speaker Pelosi, you answered in the affirmative regarding conversations about the president's health or age. What can you tell me about those conversations?
You know, again, I don't have specific recollection, but given I did talk to her on a relatively frequent basis, I'm sure, and also, you know, she is very experienced in campaigns and campaigning. So I think it's very possible that the topic had come up, but I don't have any specific recollections on that front.
Did Speaker Pelosi ever express to you that she believed it was time or appropriate for the president to drop out of the race?
I do not recall any interactions with Pelosi between the debate and his decision to drop out. She met with President Biden, but I don't think I was even involved in the logistics of that. My office could have been involved in the logistics of that, but I don't recall any specific conversation with Speaker Pelosi.
Do you remember if in her meeting with President Biden, it was if she expressed to him that she believed it was time for him to drop out of the race?
That was not I think my takeaway that I recall was that she was concerned. I have no reason to believe that she explicitly said you should drop out of the race.
And when you say that your takeaway was that Speaker Pelosi was concerned, was she concerned about the president's health or age in and of itself?
No, I think that, as I said, she was obviously very, very concerned that the Democratic nominee become the president, and she was worried about the perception issues around age, and the debate obviously heightened those concerns. But I never had any conversation with Speaker Pelosi about his ability to govern and do the job.
What were the nature of your conversations with Senator Schumer regarding the president's age or health?
Schumer pushed, I think it was Schumer himself, to get the campaign team to come to the Hill and meet with the Democratic caucus. So there were discussions around that, which ended up happening. I believe Jen O'Malley Dillon, Steve Ricchetti, and Mike Donnellan went to the Hill. So he was very pushed on that in a hard way. I can recall him circling back after that, saying that he appreciated the team doing that, but that the caucus was still very, very concerned. And then him wanting time with the president and helping to facilitate that.
And he in fact, received time, correct, with the president?
Yes, I believe it was when the president was in Rehoboth.
Do you have an idea of what was conveyed by Senator Schumer to President Biden?
At the time, I did not know for certain. I had assumed that he was going to deliver a pretty tough message. I think he called me to thank me for arranging it. He did not tell me the specifics. But my perception, just based on his skepticism post the caucus, was that it was going to be a difficult message.
Did Senator Schumer ever express his own opinion whether the president should drop out?
No, I think I interpreted it as his own opinion. I don't know if he said but based on how he was presenting the caucus, my takeaway was that the leader was skeptical, at least skeptical about the president staying in the race. And Leader Hakeem Jeffries, do you remember any conversations regarding these matters with him? Do you remember any conversations regarding these topics of health or age with Leader Jeffries? Similar, not specific like I just conveyed on Schumer, but like Pelosi, as now the speaker, obviously very concerned about the president's reelection prospects, and worried that the age was the issue, and the debate made it more intense and more front and center, even more intense and even more front and center.
Did Leader Jeffries ever express whether he thought it was time for President Biden to drop out of the race?
Not that I recall.
Returning to my general questions, do you remember any other senator expressing a concern? Strike that. Do you remember any other senator saying they believed that it was time for President Biden to drop out of the race? To you personally?
I would think that's very possible, just given the number of senators I interacted with. I don't remember any specific incident, but I would, just given the number of what I just said about the caucus and how that went, whether it was before the caucus or after the caucus, and that many senators were skeptical, and many believed he should get out. I think it's likely, more than possible, that someone expressed, or multiple expressed that to me, but I don't have any vivid recollection.
What is your understanding as to why the caucus was very concerned about President Biden staying in the race after the debate?
I think there was a level of concern to begin with in terms of age, and could he overcome the perception of his age? And then I think there was a belief post-debate that that was not overcomable, and therefore not uniform, but for those who believe that he should get out, that it was more likely that someone else could be the next president from the Democratic Party than President Biden.
Is your answer regarding senators expressing their concern, is that applicable to members of the House as well?
Yes, though I took fewer of the House calls. Steve Ricchetti took, as the sort of head of Congressional relations, many more calls in general, but my calls were more a mix of senators than members of the House.
Besides Nancy Pelosi or Hakeem Jeffries, do you remember any specific calls that you had with House members?
I don't, but it's very possible they occurred.
Do you remember any conversations with members of the cabinet wherein they expressed that they believed the president should drop out of the race?
Drop out of the race, yes. I don't think any of them were as definitive as drop out of the race, but concerns about could he win.
Do you remember who was?
Can I go backwards one? Because someone did pop into my head. I spoke to Jayapal a fair amount, and I don't recall talking to her specifically then, but remember that there became a progressive caucus meeting with the president. Steve certainly would have been handling most of that, but it is possible that I spoke to more possible than anyone else that I can think of that I spoke to her during that period of time, because I probably spoke to her once every few months in my chief of staff role.
Understood. Who on the cabinet was expressing concerns about the president's ability to win re-election?
I recall Gina Raimondo. I recall, but this is for sort of a different reason, I'm very close to Dennis McDonough. I worked with him when he was chief of staff and I was head of the NEC. We stayed in touch, were friendly in between, and then when I became chief of staff, obviously an incredible advisor to me on how you'd be an effective chief of staff. So I'm certain I talked to Dennis. I don't remember Dennis having a firm view, but we certainly talked through the pros and cons. I'm just thinking through the cabinet members that I was closest to. No one else comes to mind, but I'm sure there were other conversations.
Did Secretary Austin ever contact you with concerns about the president, either the president's reelection abilities or his underlying health or age?
No. I mean, I had a fair amount of contact with Secretary Austin, and I know that Secretary Austin was very admiring of the president's leadership, particularly in the situation.
Did Secretary Blinken ever express concern to you about the president's reelection capabilities?
As you prompt on that, yes. I don't know where Secretary Blinken netted out in his advice to the president, if he gave his advice to the president. But he definitely, as someone who had worked for years with the president, was concerned.
Did Attorney General Garland ever contact you with concerns about the president's reelection abilities?
No.
Did Secretary Becerra?
Not that I recall. Not that I recall. I mean, I'm just thinking through. He was a cabinet member who I had a lot of contact with when I was doing COVID, and much less when I was doing chief of staff duty, but I don't recall any conversation there.
And how about Secretary Mayorkas?
I did have a fair amount of contact with him, so it's possible. I don't have any specific recollection, but it's certainly possible.